Now I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Aaron Crane. He is our National HFMA Chair. Most recently, Mr. Crane held the position of Executive Vice President with the Seattle Cancer Care Alliance. He has launched the ARC Advisory Services to provide interim executive leadership, strategic planning, and operational improvement consulting services. Previously, he held positions of CEO for the Population Health Alliance of Oregon and CFO at Salem Health in Salem, Oregon. A member of HFMA since 1989, Mr. Crane has served the National Association as Secretary-Treasurer during 2019 and 20 and 2021 terms. We would call that the COVID terms, right? Exactly. So, additionally, Mr. Crane has served on the National Board of Directors as a Regional Executive Chair. He's held various chapter leadership positions, and this is one I'm a little bit peeved about because he was the Oregon chapter chair. And I'm a little bit, I'm competitive with Oregon, okay? So just so you know that, a lot of the officers already know that. So he was the president of the Oregon chapter and chapter advancement team, and he's received the HFMA's Medal of Honor, Fulmer Bronze, Reeves Silver, and Muncie Merit Awards. With that, Aaron, take it away.
Yeah, you bet. Got it. Thanks. Well, that was a lot. I did appreciate the slide pictures from last night. It was fun to look through all that, although I feel a little bad because I do not have embedded in my presentation 10 pictures of Jesse, so I hope you're okay with that. It is great to be here. One of the bonuses for spending 4 years at the Seattle Cancer Care Alliance was getting to come periodically, not frequently enough, to Washington, Alaska chapter stuff. So it was fun to go to Spokane. It was fun to go to a leadership training, Mariners game. I'm bummed that I missed the competitive things you do in the summer with Oregon. I'd love to come to that one of these days. But so it's really exciting to be in the Northwest as I'm wrapping up my tenure as the board chair to present my year's message to you all, and then I get to do it in May in Oregon as well, so this should be fun. Okay, let me see if I can get the slides going the right direction. Looks like it. Perfect. So today, a couple things, about 4 major bullets to hit. One, talk about Ignite the Spark, my theme. We'll talk a little bit about HFMA's Just Cause. And then go in a little more deep. It's not that Just Cause didn't happen by accident. HFMA's done a lot of research in this space over the last decade. How does that all play in? We'll go through 10 particular building blocks related to the Just Cause, and then a little bit about how maybe you could impact it. If we do have until 2:30, I expect to have a fair amount of time for some Q&A, so hopefully you've got a reaction or a question or you want to throw something at me. Don't throw, just talk. And I know several of you, I think, gave questions to Jesse and I yesterday, and I can always address those too. So with that, let's take it away. So I spent most of my life in Oregon. I grew up hunting, fishing, snow skiing, hiking in the mountains, lakes, and rivers in the Cascades in the central part of Oregon. This particular picture is of Davis Lake. It's a lake up there right in the middle of where I spent my time. What was unique about it is they didn't allow motorboats. So it had extra, I think, it was very clean and pristine because that was a restriction. And I know as a child, I took for granted the natural beauty and the abundant riches of this environment. And I expect some of you who grew up here in the state of Washington know what I'm talking about. One of my favorite places in the world to go experience nature is Leavenworth. The Icicle Ridge and the enchantments are beautiful. Tons of great hiking in the Wenatchee River. So that is, I don't think I could hold a candle to that. Oregon's got some beauty too, but it's that spectacular. So here we are at Davis Lake. 2003, I turned 40, and the Davis Lake fire struck, and it burned more than 40,000 acres. You know, it's kind of funny because when you grow up in all of that, and all of a sudden this happens, it's just amazing, and then you realize, I'm never going to see that again like I did. Well, I got to go back. My brother and I took a snowmobile trip about 5 years later, and that's my first view of the damage from this destruction. And there it was. It's like a burnt platter of scraps. And so it was absolutely breathtaking. And since that year, forest fires have come to Oregon at an alarming rate. It's increasing, the intensities are increasing, the damage and destruction continues. Again, I don't think I have to preach this too hard for people living in this state. But now it's really an annual fear as these things have gotten closer and closer to our population centers. Across the western U.S., it's the same. Mother Nature had a plan to manage these forest fires with natural wildfires, lightning strikes or whatever. But when we entered into the system, we fought to contain those fires. We had other incentives for the land, and we chose to do that. Over the decades, deadwood and underbrush accumulated because we put these fires out. Now, we're at a point where we can't contain the fires. The heat happens too quickly, and we cannot keep up with them. We do have a tactic. Our primary tactic for this is called the prescribed burn. Professional firefighters will go into the forest, and they will set fires, cleaning out the dead brush and all the underbrush and the dead wood. Also, those fires will take invasive insects out that leaves the forest healthy, in a healthier place. Well, my theme this year is built on this. The U.S. healthcare system, in my mind, is like an unmanaged forest. It's filled with dead wood and underbrush. And our system results in the lowest quality in the developed world compared to other nations like ours. But we also have the greatest expense. Whoops, I hit too many. There we go. So last year, 2021, we're kind of in the later part of my year, but in 2021, the Commonwealth Fund issued this report, Mirror, Mirror. And in the report, they compared the United States with 10 other developed high-income countries. The researchers analyzed 71 metrics across 5 domains: access to care, care process, administrative efficiency, equity, and healthcare outcomes. So where do you think the United States came out in this analysis? Well, if you said dead last, you're right. The top performing countries were Norway, Netherlands, and Australia. And we finished last in 4 out of the 5 categories. And that's despite spending far more of our gross domestic product on healthcare than any of the others. At that point, we were at about 16.8%. In COVID, we got up to 20%. I'm not quite sure where we are today. But all these other countries, their average is about 10.5% of their GDP. So looking at quality in this study, they chose the metric of avoidable deaths per 100,000 population. And in the United States, our number is 250 deaths per 100,000 people that were avoidable. In these other countries, they're at about 150 deaths per 100,000 or lower. Now, the other interesting thing on this chart, when you look at the orange and the blue, there's a 10-year gap, the orange being older. And so you see over the course of 10 years, in every one of these countries, including the U.S., we improved over 10. That's great. But look at the space between the orange and the blue and how small it is in the U.S. compared to the others to the left. So after delving into all these countries' performance across these domains, the researchers concluded there are 4 features that distinguish these top-performing countries from us. First, they provide universal coverage, removing cost barriers for their population. They invest in primary care systems to ensure the high-value services are equitably available in all of their communities. They reduce administrative burdens that divert time, effort, and spending from health outcomes and quality improvement. And they invest in social services, particularly children and working-age adults. So, What in our forest, I was just trying to catch my note, but never mind. What in our forest should be viewed as a dead wood and underbrush that keeps us from performing at a level that we know we're capable? Well, I have, move ahead, there we go. I have three things that I'm going to talk about. I think they're pretty important. We might be able to find other things too, but these are, I think, I'll build a case for why they're on my list. First, we have a perverse set of misaligned incentives. We built a system to do one thing, and now we think we need something else, which I think we do too. Two, we have an American lifestyle that produces a population with 37% greater disease burden than the average of those countries we're comparing ourselves to. And finally, we have disparities in health and healthcare that are dramatically worse than other developed nations. So let's talk about these things. I don't know if you've read Michael Porter's book, the Harvard guy, it's Redefining Healthcare. But he notes that a key flaw in our healthcare system is the mixing of a capitalist structure around a social responsibility. For capitalism to truly drive market efficiency, it must reward those who do good and punish those who do harm. And that does not happen in our healthcare system at the level of frequency and consistency that would be required. So let me show you some examples of this to illustrate this dead wood. MRI scans. This is a graph that shows you these developed nations and how many MRI scanners they have per 1 million population. And we're number 2 in the world among these groups. We have 40 more scanners per million than every country to the right. Japan is the only one that has more. And who manufactures these things? We do, and they do. A little bit in Germany. 1, 2, 3, right there. You're not. I do. It's right there. Okay, I got to look everywhere now. Thank you. So there it is. You see Japan, United States, etc. Now, I said 40 more per million. That is a $20 billion capital investment just in that excess capacity. And these machines typically get replaced every 10 years. That's not necessarily the cost to think about, though. Look at the revenue generation on that excess capacity, which is really cost to us as a society. Staggering. This excessive supply has created unnecessary demand. Okay, I'm going to click it there. There. Let's talk about back surgery. A study conducted in 1994 comparing the United States to 10 other countries. I don't know that they're the same ones from the Commonwealth Fund, but I'm sure there's significant overlap. And they found that the U.S. was at least 40% higher than everybody else in terms of the frequency of the back surgery. They also found that back surgery rates increase with the number of orthopedic and neurosurgeons in that area. It's another case of supply creating demand. All right, Gilbert Welch. We'll talk about this book, Overdiagnosed. Gilbert Welch, at the time faculty at Dartmouth, he wrote this book about making people sick in the pursuit of health. And he tells a story about a person called Mr. Roberts. He was found to have elevated blood sugar. It wasn't that high, but it did prompt more testing. And in the results of the testing, he came back with type 2 diabetes. Again, he wasn't really expressing symptoms, but they said, let's put you on a medication to lower your blood sugar. So 6 months later, he's driving on the interstate and he blacks out. Has a wreck, broken neck, major hospitalization and rehabilitation. Now, the good news is that he lived, he recovered. He went on to live till into his 90s as a patient of Dr. Welch. The point of the story is the fact that if his diabetes treatment hadn't been so aggressive, he probably wouldn't have blacked out in the first place. Aggressive treatment in the absence of symptoms is an example of underbrush and deadwood. Now, I'm going to pause for just a second because it's not always the truth, right? Things are rarely always and never. There clearly are cancers that you catch them before they're symptomatic, you'll save lives, whether it's prostate, breast, and a couple others. So this is not an all truth, but it certainly has merit where we have overtreated ahead of symptoms and caused harm. Now look at this chart. It's in the book as well. I better advance the slides, Shannon. Okay. These 4 conditions have one thing in common. And I think it was in the 90s. In the 90s, the threshold for diagnosis was lowered on all 4 of them. And that created millions more people diagnosed with a chronic condition than prior. And I'm sure there's some good in there, but I think there's also, discussed in the book, some overtreatment that really followed. So let's talk about American lifestyle. According to the CDC, 6 in 10 Americans have a chronic disease. 2/3 of them have 2 or more chronic conditions. Now, the leading lifestyle risks contributing to this include tobacco use, poor nutrition, lack of physical activity, and excessive use of alcohol. So my message to you today is, if you're having a beer this evening, play cornhole. It's an activity, and I think it'll counteract, and you'll be okay. I'm not a doctor. All right? So, the healthcare industry traditionally has been focused on healthcare as a lever for improving both outcomes and costs. But we know now that healthcare is not the major contributor to health. I'm sure you've seen versions of this chart, and if I advance it, you'll really see them. The 60% of our health is impacted and influenced by social behavior, environmental factors, the social determinants of health. 20% of our health is based on our genetics. And then 20% comes from healthcare. So all this work in healthcare is only contributing 20% to an individual's health. The American Action Forum released a report on chronic conditions in 2020, and about 47% of the U.S. population suffers from at least one, according to them, and about 30 million Americans have 5 or more chronic conditions. Roughly 99% of Medicare spending and 80% of Medicaid spending target the treatment of chronic conditions. It's also projected that our population over the age of 65 will double by 2060. Thinking about the increased chronic illness that will bring with it really suggests that we have a wildfire of biblical proportions coming to this system. The total cost of chronic disease is estimated at about $3.7 trillion, 19.6% of our GDP. That includes indirect costs. A lot of it is lost productivity. About 1.1 trillion of it is truly medical spend. So health disparities. Health inequity in this country is pretty well documented. Last September, HFMA held its 15th annual thought leadership meeting, and this was our topic: health inequity, health disparities. And that work is now published on a report that you can go to the HFMA website and pull down. I'd encourage you to read it. But it's really summarized the conversation into these 10 steps toward health equity. We know it's a problem. What do we do about it? And I'm very happy that they put this together. It's a summary. I wouldn't call it as deep as you might want, but I think it gets you started in this as you start thinking about how we can make a difference. So last summer, Deloitte issued a study about the cost of health inequity. And they said today it costs us about $320 billion a year. Because people don't have the same access, don't have the same level of health. They get to a place where they go to a pretty acute setting that's really expensive because we aren't managing things at a very small fraction of that cost prospectively. But look, by 2040, this is going to be $1 trillion. That's a staggering number, too. The Commonwealth Fund, in their mirror report, gave us this comparison around equity. And you can see the U.S. at the far right at the very bottom of this. And a lot of it has to do with access. That's kind of the major point in the graphic there. So the accumulation of dead wood and underbrush highlighted here has definitely prompted my theme for this year. Our system demands a series of controlled burns to clean this forest up and avoid the devastation and harm that will come from our current trajectory. I believe it's past time for us to manage this ecosystem and cultivate a healthy forest. So that's why I am asking everybody to ignite the spark, to transform our system into something that's cost-effective, a world-class example of sustainable population health. It's what we need. In fact, this combination of issues and the compounding effects have compelled HFMA to focus its resources and its vast network on improving the cost-effectiveness of health in the United States. And we're going to talk more about that here in a minute. But first, a couple of terms to define. When we say cost-effectiveness of health, what are we talking about? Well, our society has been focused on care for the sick, addressing disease and treating symptoms. As discussed, this only influences about 20% of overall health. So we're missing the mark. We're solving the wrong problems, and sometimes unsuccessfully, many times. Cost-effectiveness of health means minimizing the costs associated with delivering the optimal health outcomes. This entails identifying what spending is appropriate to realize the best possible outcomes. And that's different from just reducing cost or bending the cost curve in our individual organizations. Also important, that's healthcare. We're trying to move to something bigger, health. And this isn't uniquely an American issue. It is worldwide. I got to spend a little time in England December and talk to them about this. They don't have enough money either. They've got 7 million people on their waiting list to be seen. So this is a struggle for all of us. And eventually this transformation will benefit our society very clearly, including the healthcare purchasers and providers. So when we talk at HFMA about a just cause, what is that? And if you haven't had a chance, I would encourage you to read, even if it's an audio version, but Simon Sinek, he's got a book called The Infinite Game. In that book, he defines an infinite game. We all know what a finite game is because we go cheer them on, football, baseball, basketball, and others. But an infinite game is one where you don't always know who your opponent is, and new ones can join any time. An infinite game, there's no beginning, no middle, no end. There are no rules to which everyone has agreed. Every player defines their own strategies and tactics. And the objective isn't to win. It's simply to stay in the game, maintain relevance. I agree with him that we as providers of healthcare are in an infinite game. He suggests that success is more likely for those players with a just cause. A just cause refers to a vision that's shared across many people and entities. It attracts people to your cause. I'm sorry about this. And you can see on the slide, it's got several of the key characteristics. A just cause is something that is for something. It's not against something else. It's inclusive. It pulls everybody who wants to get behind it in. Typically service-oriented, and it's resilient. You kind of never get to the end. You can always do better. You can always be more. You can always help more. And there's a sense of idealisticness in it. So, why now then? Why are we talking about cost-effectiveness of health? Well, I look at the fundamental economics of our country, what we as a society are leaving for our children and grandchildren. It's immoral. The national debt, as of November of 2020, $27 trillion. This is $91,000 of debt for every man, woman, and child living in this country. How many families of four can afford an additional $360,000 in personal debt? The Medicare Trust Fund will be insolvent in 2028. And I don't even want to talk about this annual debate about the debt ceiling, but I mean, there are repercussions that can happen even from that. And I think Victor Fuchs, he's a renowned health policy economist, professor emeritus at Stanford, put it bluntly as noted on this slide. And he'd said this probably 20 years ago. we simply must solve our healthcare spending problem. There's nothing else bigger that we can solve instead. If we don't, what else? There's nothing else that we can do. It doesn't matter. Everything else we do just doesn't matter. So that's why HFMA has decided to tackle the cost effectiveness of health now. Costs in the U.S. are unsustainable and are continuing to grow at rates beyond annual inflation. And the strengths that required to solve this are in our wheelhouse. We're finance leaders. We're part of the solution. We won't always lead every step of the way, but we have something very valuable to offer. By tackling this issue, we can have a lasting and meaningful impact on our society. And everybody I talk to in this industry, part of the pull is I can make a difference. I can help my fellow man, and there's not a bigger issue for us to work on to that end. In some ways, I think the timing is perfect. We're coming out of this pandemic, kind of what next? We've retooled a little bit through that, and I think this is a place that can catalyze a great vision and a movement, and I'm hopeful that we can get more and more people wrapped around it as the economics are becoming more and more intense. And I think I'm going to go slightly off script, because one of the questions that came to me yesterday from someone in the room was, well, what's HFMA's strategy for the next 5 years? And I think this is a great place to say, well, I think I just told you about it. But let me give you a little bit of color, though. HFMA is an organization with a rich history. Acute care hospitals are in the backbone, and the revenue cycle is really the driver. Everybody knows it. The lifeblood of this organization is because our providers have real issues in their revenue cycle, and our business partners have real solutions, and it creates a forum to talk about that and advance the industry from both perspectives. And that's how we're able to put conferences on, and you can look over there and it confirms it. And that is something we have got to have and sustain and grow and nurture and feed, and we all know that. But the other thing we know is the industry consolidation and the shrink and the combination and the outsourcing to India and other things have changed the volume of people that can come together. The scale of providing the education and network opportunities is hard to achieve with an audience that's shrinking. And it's not shrinking that fast, fortunately, but I can tell you over the past 5 years, it was shrinking. One of the other questions about HFMA financially, and I can tell you it's pretty stable, very stable. I think our days cash on hand and reserves are comparable with our strongest chapters. But your membership model that's tied to one annual conference for its year is at risk if you don't think about those things and you don't watch your membership trends. I think if we didn't implement the enterprise membership program a few years back, I don't know. I mean, that has been a tremendous success. It's growing every year. We look at, you'd expect some individual memberships to just transfer over, and they have. It's brought other people to HFMA. We're over 100,000 people now. And so that's been a very important initiative. Website development has been another really critical one. We now have data and information we didn't have before. We need to go further with that and learn how to do our analytics on it, and we're getting there. But the question is, we have these visions of these 5,000 people at an annual conference, and we do annual conferences quite well. I've been very happy with the movement in that conference. But to expect the same people at the same level of participation, given all of the headwind we just talked about, is that realistic? And so when you think about this cost effectiveness of health, by grabbing that, who else can we bring to the table and bring under the tent to work on those issues? Because we can't solve any of that by ourselves. You need payers, you need physicians, you need government agencies, you need public health. Can this conference or items like it evolve into something bigger, where all of our traditional revenue cycle activity and discussions can continue to happen and need to happen, but we're also talking about other issues? Is there room in the tent for all of it? I think there is. I think there has to be. And so I think that's really a critical element in terms of strategy and tactic for HFMA. We're serious about the problem. This is not just a play for attention. serious about the problem because we know it's the right problem to focus on. And let's do it in a way that helps us all thrive in this association, but also in the industry. So that, I think, is the biggest play in here. There are other things you'll see HFMA do, I am sure. But at its heart, the revenue cycle flywheel that has kept this thing moving, and we've got lots of cost and finance side too, but that's really been the engine. And as we continue to feed that engine and draw others in, I think we've got some great opportunities. Very interested too. We've got a new board member coming from Trinity, and she's on fire. If you don't know Nikki Harper, hopefully you'll meet her at one of the conferences. But she has a great vision for how we engage the physician structure in our enterprise membership. Because if we can start building more value for that piece of our operation, we see a lot of opportunity. And I agree with her. I'm hoping that that's a direction her leadership will bring. So I hope I hit those questions effectively, and we can certainly take more Q&A on that in a little bit. So let's talk a little bit more about HFMA's journey. I mentioned over the past 10 years. We didn't just wake up one day and see this issue and, oh, we got to grab this. But it's been building. If you go back to 2011, we did our first pioneering research on the healthcare value source book. This is a big, thick book. When I became the CEO of Population Health Alliance of Oregon, I did my first 2 or 3 months there. I pulled this thing up and I read it. And it is deep, dense, and very thorough. I think some of the stuff in there is dated, but it's really good if you're trying to see, well, how does this work? What are the key elements that we're talking about? I think you'll find them in there. And I would encourage you to take a look. 2019, the Thought Leadership Retreat again came up. And at this one, the focus was social determinants of health. It's the first time the Thought Leadership meeting focused on something bigger than healthcare, bigger than what's inside of our walls today. And so everybody in the room was talking about this, and they issued a report, not as dense as the value book. It's a fairly quick read, and again, I think it's quite good if you want to brush up a little. What are the definitions of this stuff? What are the important issues? It's a very good book, and I need to keep advancing the ding slides. You're too polite. Where'd I go? Now it's not working. Next one. Next one. There. Wonder if it'll go in. Oh, you woke me up. Okay. So I would encourage you to read this. There's another really good book called The Health Gap by Michael Marmot, who also talks about these things extensively. And I think he's a guy from the UK. He's a physician who trained in the UK, and he's kind of examining the US healthcare system and offering his opinion. And it's easy to kind of, but no, there's some really good insight in it, and I would encourage it if you're interested. At this Thought Leadership Retreat, there we go, we asked the participants, which one of the following social determinants of health do you see as the largest influencer of healthcare costs in the patient populations that you're serving? Nutrition, right to the top for that group. Housing, number 2. And I think those are really important issues, and I wouldn't disagree with the group. The thing that surprised me a little bit was education was so low. And you read the Health Gap, and you might shift your perspective a little bit. Education is kind of a little further upstream from housing and nutrition issues. You get a good education, you're more likely to work, you're more likely to stay out of jail. You're less likely to be involved in a teenage pregnancy, which puts a whole other set of pressures on a young person. So education is a really critical element too. But yet the other thing we know is these things vary. What's important in one community may not be the exact same thing that's important in another community. So when we're trying to solve these problems, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Okay. So in 2021, another thought leadership session, and this is where it's invitation only. It's very heavily provider systems. I think right now the sponsor is Humana, so they bring people too, and there are a couple others. I don't know who makes the decisions, but it is kind of an invitation only thing. Get 150 people in the room, do breakout sessions, and talk. And so this, in 2021, we put the pieces together on this to get a clear picture of what it would take to achieve cost-effective health, knowing that health care is only 20% of the deal, and knowing that we can't tackle it alone. So through that exercise, we put together another report. It helps us break down this big thing of achieving cost-effective health into smaller bite-sized blocks, as we call them. In fact, there are 10 blocks. And let me just give you a quick run through this. That's the report. There are really 3 categories of work that these 10 building blocks fit within. The first one is changing our mindset. The second one is putting consumers first. And then the third one is supporting the transformation. Once you get your mindset shifted and you got your focus on the right people, how do you sustain it? So the very first one is about changing the mindset. It is job one, and it's probably the hardest one. You know, we've always been focused on healthcare. We've had a system that's worked for us for years, decades. We understand what's going on here, and the pieces that are outside of that, not really our traditional domain. Maybe they don't really apply to me personally. So there's a tendency to compartmentalize all that, just put it aside. But remember, the person buying the drill just wants the hole. And so we've got customers out there, their goal isn't to have their blood drawn every 4 hours and do all these tests and think about this and wait in line and fight with an insurance company or whatever. They just want to be healthy. And I think when you look at the competitive landscape in healthcare today and you see these new entrants, and what do they have in common? They've got big data on their customers. They know what their customers want. They know when they're going to want it, and they're finding ways to give them what they want and need, and they're drawing people out of our system. And that's going to continue to happen until we can find a way to think about our customers more intentionally. And I know we always think about our patients. I'm kind of critical on this too, because I feel like we've known for years what makes our patients not happy. It's easy. They can't get in. They don't understand what you got doing. They don't know what's wrong with them. They don't know what you're giving them. They have to wait for 4 or 5 hours in a room full of sick people. We get that feedback daily. What do we do about it? What have we ever done about it? And, that's been a frustration, as you might see, for me. And so to think about them and what they want and to meet them where they are and to deliver what they need and how they need it is a critically important thing. And we have to be brutally honest with ourselves about the degree to which we're doing it. And I think we'll have to constantly remind ourselves of this reframing as we go along. It's very easy to get caught up in the way we used to do things. But really, is this what I'm doing here, what I'm investing in, going to be better for my customer? Will they understand that? Okay, number 2 in the building block is really to embrace disruption. Oh, sure. You're just dying to see it, yeah? Thank you. I should just give you the clicker. So disruptors are both large and small. They are consumer focused, as I said. I think they're consumer obsessed. We're missing the mark on convenience and value as trust in us as a delivery system continues to erode and exposes us to disruptive threats. And I think I put this in my article, if you ever read any of these things in HFM. I did this poker game thing. And, you got the poker game and you got the sheep and a bunch of wolves at the table, and if you don't recognize the mark, you're it, And I think about the Amazons of the world, and they're the wolves. I hope I didn't offend anybody. It's all metaphor. But they're looking at the poker chips, the opportunities to take some of that $1.1 trillion spend and pull it into their system. And, if they can give someone what they want better and faster and cheaper than we can, good on them. Just recognize what's going to be left is the stuff they don't want. And it's going to be much harder to run a system. You just get reduced to a commodity. I'm now just providing emergency services and trauma services and cancer at the end stage. So, I think we have to work on that. And there are a couple other building blocks we're going to talk about that are expensive and time-consuming. And if we're playing catch-up, how do you ever get ahead? This picture you see is a part of HFMA's 2030 series. That's also available on the website. And there's a bunch of reports. I think there's like 4 in a year in this series, and well worth reading if you're interested. Okay, we'll advance. Gaining consumer trust. Now, there's this study here. we're not trusted like maybe we once were. And they did a study, as Gallup West, they did a study in 2021 and really talking about trust in U.S. healthcare systems and how it has eroded through the pandemic. And I think this is really important. About 60% of the people say they are more concerned about people having unequal access to quality healthcare services. And about 7 in 10 say they're paying too much for the value they're receiving. Now, what's interesting is at that retreat on health equity, I sat at a table with a bunch of health system leaders, and they said, no, they trust us. I don't believe that statistic. Our hospital's full. And it's like, well, follow who? And how do they feel? Did you really ask them? What about the 30% of your community you're not even serving? Why aren't they coming to you? And so I think that's a blinder that we've got to be very careful about. Because if they aren't trusting us, who are they trusting? And when the next best thing comes, how are they going to pick? And I think building their trust is paying attention to their needs. And you look at care delivery. I mean, this is a great place for us to be focused. Primary care is ripe for disruptive companies. At the RevCycle Summit last week, I heard a statistic. The average wait time to see a primary care doctor is 21 days. When I need a primary care doctor, my symptoms are resolved in about 5, right? So that doesn't help. We got to pay attention to these guys. And I can tell you, when I moved from Seattle to Portland, I got a new doctor through my wife's health plan. They made me go on the website digitally to get an appointment. I said, it's a first appointment. We'll see you in late July, and that was like 6 weeks later. Okay, I'll take that one. Thank God I got an appointment. 6 weeks. The next day, I get an email from them. Sorry, that won't work. We canceled you. On an email. So then I go set up another one, and they give me a virtual appointment. I take it. Then I hear, it's a first appointment, right? Well, yeah. Well, we don't do those virtually. So, I mean, we have to think about what the hell we're doing. When I shop on Amazon, I don't have that problem. They give me a credit card, I take what I want, and they give it to me. Usually next day. You know, what's interesting, too, as you think about this, disruptive companies are looking at segments differently. Women or older adults issues, behavioral and lifestyle improvement, remote patient monitoring, medication adherence. They're looking at these kinds of problems and solving them. We're stuck in systems organized around biologic organs and organ systems. And I think that gets back to the old culture and seeing the old problem, not thinking about the new. All right, chronic disease. And this is another place to put patients first, right? We are not taking care of chronic conditions in the most cost-effective manner. I talked about it a little bit earlier. They drive health spending. The most widely quoted statistics, 5% of our people drive 50% of our health spend. And that's pretty close. When I was looking at population health data in Oregon, I think I would say if you go up to about 15%, you get closer to 70 to 80% of the spend. And so when you talk about $3.7 trillion in our total spend, including lost productivity, this is important. Annual health care costs for people with chronic conditions are 5 times higher from others. They're more likely to be admitted, and once they're admitted, they're going to stay longer because of these extra ailments. 60% of emergency department visits are associated with chronic condition. I think 40% of that is preventable. And I think it's about $26 billion if we could just treat these people more effectively. And chronic conditions are strongly linked to social determinants. When you have these social determinants of health at play, you're more likely to develop chronic illness, such as air pollution. People that have to live in an area with air pollution, power lines, or, those kinds of things affect your health. Think about people with multiple chronic conditions. I missed my spot. Sorry about that. Especially older people, addressing social determinants with healthy meals, transportation to appointments. I'm struggling with that with my dad, who's 2 hours away from me. You know, they offer him taxi cabs, but he doesn't really want to get in a taxi cab. Several times I've definitely gone down and taken the day to make sure he gets the right stuff, but this is hard. And what will happen is they're going to end up, because they won't get the care they need, they won't get the food they need, they're going to end up in an emergency room. They might end up in an ICU, and they might end up with an extended stay. We need to develop our social determinants of health strategies as well, and that feeds chronic condition, but it's bigger than that. And I think this is something that it is really, it's multifaceted. Health systems are not going to be able to do this alone. You know, we talked last year in Tammy Jackson's national presentation about ProMedica, a company that invested in nutrition to feed food deserts in Ohio. But the revenue proposition wasn't sustainable. I'm not even sure the thing is still around. They tried it. It was the right thing to do for the community, but no one else stands up to help you with it, and it doesn't pencil. You've got to get public health and community leaders involved in this stuff. It was really interesting. Bellin Health gave an example at the Thought Leadership there in Wisconsin. They partnered with the school district on something that sounded, I wish I could remember all the details of it, but the fact that they sat down with a school district and worked on an issue that would help their community, I think that's exactly what we need to be doing. But you have to look at your own community and what are the issues here? And who do we need to bring it to the table, and can we check our ego just a little bit and involve others in solutions? We're going to have to. And I should have advanced again, but it's okay, it's just a few pictures. So bolstering the workforce is a big one. There are two elements to this, playing catch up with what we need today. I mean, the pandemic rushed a few people to retirement, burnt several people out of our industry completely, and we're stuck with big gaps in our workforce. And unionization activities are up. My wife at Providence is dealing with the physician group that is now organizing. And, you know, St. Charles in Oregon also went through a process. And not that these things, it's not about good or bad, but it is activity that takes you away from the real issues. And you have to pay attention to your workforce and make sure that they're healthy and committed and engaged and valued. And beyond that, then, how do we fill the gaps we have? The education pipeline has never been enough. For nursing, for pharmacists, for physical therapists. The education system doesn't address revenue cycle stuff. What's your learning curve when you bring someone in to teach them things? I mean, if someone leaves that's been there for 10 years, how long does it take you to get to that level of quality again? So we've got to think differently about this now. We can't catch up on that. We got to continue to solve that. We have to think about education systems and attracting more students that are interested in careers in this, and where do we find teachers that will teach them? All of that has to be thought about, worked on, and developed, but it isn't going to be fast enough. I even know health systems that they're closing capacity because they can't staff safely their clinic or their beds. So this is really harmful. Now get outside of that. If we're saying we want to focus on health and treat people a little differently, that requires a different workforce and a different organization and a different flow. So we have to think about that too. So and how we make that work. I think, you know, the easy thing is build another hospital, add another 100 beds. The more difficult thing is, how do I redefine the flow of this and move patients so I don't have to build that? And I treat these people, these 40% coming to my ED, in a different way. How do I do that? And it's kind of scary because I get paid a lot of money when they come to the ED or to get admitted as an inpatient. I don't want to give that up. No one wants to give it up. I'm not even saying here you should give it up, but we've got to find a way to move this forward and not just wait for it to collapse around us on its own weight. I think what's exciting for me in this space is I go to all these conferences. There's always somebody in the room that's focused on artificial intelligence, which I hate that word. Who wants artificial anything? You know, but that's what we call it, artificial intelligence. But these tools that are doing things electronically that we're having people do over and over in a very repetitive way, and how do we get our systems how do we embrace that more thoroughly? So the 10 people that I'm looking to hire, maybe I only need 5 now. It's not perfect, it's not something you can just turn on tomorrow and it'll work. It takes a little work to get to the full level, but I've talked to a couple of rev cycle leaders, and they've gotten some pretty staggering results for their investments in this. And it's really exciting to see some of these solutions develop. And I think most are at least thinking about this if they haven't already started on it, and I would say move faster. I think the other thing, when you are practicing, if you're a healthcare system in a community that just doesn't have the expertise you need, you have to start looking at partnerships differently. Are there people out there that can do functions that I can't fully staff or invest in the technology required to do it cost effectively? These are part of these business partner solutions that are out there that we just simply have to look at because the workforce isn't there, it's not coming anytime soon, and I don't have a choice. So, that's my refreshing news on workforce. This, by the way, is the number one topic at every HFMA conference I've been to in the last 6 months. This is on the agenda somewhere. I don't know where we are here in this one, and I won't judge you if it's not. but it's a very important issue on everybody's minds. Okay. This is the other big one. Measure what matters. I think this is part of our problem in this transformation is we don't have the data we need to really make the kind of decisions we need to or design a system that better meets our patients' needs. There is data on our patients everywhere. In our own hospitals, we probably have 200 or 300 different devices collecting data on either their current health status, things we've done to them, results on tests, and it doesn't communicate, and it doesn't come into a central place with a standard structure so you can do anything with it. And I think that's incredibly problematic, especially when you think about Walmart and CVS and Amazon and what they're doing with data and how they know the flu is coming tomorrow and we better get the shelf stocked because we see it over here. They know how to read their data, and we don't necessarily know how to read ours and get to a point of prediction. You know, we tried that in Population Health Alliance. You know, we could look at data that, you know, some hospital in Indiana was acting on it and making a difference, and our docs would say, no, I know who my sickest patients are, that's not right. And so you've got, a traditional culture that you have to get over on some of this, but we've got to get started, and I think the investment and the time and the skill sets we need to manage this effectively are all absent. It's kind of funny when you hear the word data scientist. Do you know what that is? There are now schools educating on it, thank God. It's something. And there is something to it. I just haven't figured it out yet, but we need them. We need people that understand data, understand what it means, what it's telling us, and what it's not telling us, or we'll make bad assumptions. Okay. Leveraging digital health. You know, this is an easy one to chat a little bit about. You know, you can look at the productivity gain in every industry except healthcare because of technology adoption. It's staggering. Our growth has been on the backs of people, airline, travel, restaurants, banks. Their growth has been because technology has enabled it. Their cost to do is different than ours. And so that's one element of digital health. The other piece of this is when you look at your patients who are becoming more and more digitally savvy, you've got to be able to have a digital solution to meet them at every step on their journey. It's not just about collecting a bill or admitting them to a hospital. But no, you don't want to see it. Here, you should just take this damn thing out of my hand. But it's really important. Now, in the pandemic, we got to do things with virtual health that really advanced us a little bit. It's not our panacea. You know, at Seattle Cancer Care, it was pretty impressive how fast we got the technology to work, got our doctors doing it. We had pitfalls. We had a doctor tell me how he spent 45 minutes trying to help his patient get connected so they could even have the visit. And so that's kind of a poor use of both of their time. But now those things are probably still happening. But we have physicians there now that are practicing virtually all the time. Not everybody, but some of them. And the beauty of it is, you know, for a specialty hospital like that, where we have a lot of patients that would come from Bellingham, come from Central Washington, and they have to come in and get an MRI and talk to their doctor. And the average, we had one study say the average cost of someone to come to us was between $1,000 and $2,000. How many people can afford to just throw that out in lost wages, travel cost, if I got to stay overnight just for this? You know, there's probably an MRI with 10 minutes in my house. Why am I going all the way over here? And so there are still problems there we need to solve. But there's real potential with virtual care. It's not going to answer everything. I keep saying this to people. What's funny is in the West, everybody thinks everybody has a cell phone. Oh, sure, no problem. Anybody can just get on their phone and do this. To the Southeast, it's like, hell, we've got a lot of people that don't have these things. And I think they're right, and we're maybe a little naive. Now, my dad, I mentioned him, 84. He's not using a cell phone to talk to anybody. Verizon just stopped his landline. That was the most painful day in his life. I mean, We went and got him the simplest phone he could manage. There's no data, nothing on this. He's not having a visit on a phone. And I don't think he's the only guy out there like that. And so we're not there yet. Maybe in 30 years, that generation will be fully functional in this world. But it's a very important thing, but it's not solving everything. Okay, let's do alignment of payment systems. So every system does perfectly what it was designed to do. I believe that. And the financial incentive is right at the heart of it. And so we designed financial incentives in our current system to do exactly what we're doing. We pay for procedures and treatments, not health. And I think the system is outdated. I mean, when you think about back in the 1800s when, hell, if you read the social transformation of medicine, no one really even liked physicians, probably till the early 1900s, and didn't trust them, and they were self-serving or whatever, and it's a really interesting read. But it's relatively new. The government said we need hospitals, so they threw Hill-Burton money out there, and we started building hospitals everywhere. Then we said it's too damn expensive, so let's create DRGs to cap everybody, and we're not really necessarily going to reward the best quality. We'll just give everybody less. Every time we do something major, including prescription benefits, we as people figure out how to use that thing to our advantage based on what we think our advantage is. And at the time, we're now at a place where we're saying, wait a minute, our budget's being spent, 20% of our GDP is being spent on this, and maternal mortality is worse here than in some third world countries. That isn't right. We need to change our incentives. You know, and the payment model is it, and we have to get back to what is it we value as a society, and how do we create incentives? And it's not just incentives for physicians and hospitals, it's incentives for people. What's my incentive to eat healthy? I don't care, you can take care of me, you know? So these incentives have got to be driven out of a society that's just going to decide what we value, what we're willing to pay for, and what our collective role is in this. So this realignment of care and coverage is another article in the Healthcare 2030. If you want to take a read, I encourage you to do so. I think the value-based payment models are good and a step in the right direction. The problem is not enough players at the table on this to make it scale. And what I mean by that is, you know, we couldn't find a payer, independent of hospital-owned payer, that would really play with meat. And they had good reasons. You know, they didn't trust our ability to manage it. They're probably smart. But they also liked the economic model they had. It worked for them. Why change this? Why share it with you? You should already be doing care that way. What do you mean I'm going to reward you for doing the right thing? You know, that kind of stuff is really difficult. When you own your own, like Geisinger, like Kaiser, like Intermountain, you can do meaningful things in here. You can manage patients in a manner that's economically feasible. I remember 20 years ago or so, I was at an Intermountain conference, and the guy was telling me about this great thing he just did to save ICU days. It cost him, I don't know, $15 million. It's the right thing to do. But how many systems are going to do that without being in this in a different way? And I think it's also really important not to just lead with a new value model. It's like managed care in the 80s when we all negotiated these contracts, then told people what they needed to do to collect the money. You know, in the patient accounting office I was working with, no one ever told me I had to bill it that way. No one ever told me that was a pre-auth thing. And it just created a mess. Well, we could do that here too. We could take risk on value, but we don't talk to our physicians about how we're going to manage it differently. We don't talk to our clinical people. We don't even hire social workers. So there is risk in this if you don't do it holistically from all of the angles. Okay, so those were the blocks I wanted to highlight, just kind of coming back to the three areas: changing mindset, putting consumers first, and supporting transformation. This is how they're organized. Again, I'd encourage you to download the book. I think it's a very fairly summarized again, but interesting. Where do we begin? Well, I'm certainly proud of HFMA's commitment to get this moving. And over the coming year, I think we can ask ourselves, what can we do to advance the cause? What waste, rework, delay, duplication is visible within our own spheres of influence? What can we take on? How can we promote healthier living in our surroundings? What can we do to close disparity gaps in our local communities? Every nonprofit health system does a community needs assessment. A lot of them look very similar in terms of the issues. How many of us are really doing things meaningfully there? Are patient accounting programs equipped to deal with people where English isn't their first language? Is the setup of our lobby, waiting room, and organization inclusive for the people that are in our community? Do they feel welcome? Do they want to come? There are all kinds of things we can do that don't have to be Herculean that will help. And this is our call to action and is our time to answer these questions and identify the part of this expansive forest that each of us can tend, initiating our own version of a prescribed burn. I understand it's a daunting task. I'd like to close my remarks with some thoughts about how we can ignite the spark at an individual level. So I've talked about 3 domains. The delivery system domain, many of us are working in that. American lifestyle and health and equity, 3 big things that have root cause characteristics that are contributing to this bloated healthcare system that is not giving us the quality we deserve as a population. The first thing I say is be curious, ask questions. Ask, why is this so? What could be different? How would it be better? Is this really valuable to the people I'm working with and the people I serve? And in this, you should follow your own passion. Find your own just cause. We've laid one out for HFMA. What's yours? Because if you're not following that, it won't be sustainable and it won't be fulfilling. Be data-driven and solve real problems. Confirm with data your suspicion before you launch. We do this a lot and in healthcare, and so I would encourage you to start there. And really, truly embrace the voice of the patient or your customer. For you business partners in the room, how do your products, how do your services contribute to those you serve around these aims? Because these are the problems we have to solve. And I think to the extent you're aligned there, it creates an attraction that is sustainable. So, those are my thoughts. I hope you found value in it. I appreciate your attention. Thank you for the prompts. I'll get you to the last slide. And with that, if you have questions, I'd love to hear them, or reactions, concerns. Yeah.
One of the features, is on? One of the features that you talk about with these other countries is the universal coverage. And a big complaint in the U.S., opposition against that, is that the quality goes down.
Yeah.
That's the message,
Yeah.
right? But why and how did those countries get to universal coverage? What was their journey like?
That's a good
That gives you
question.
an indication of what our journey
Yeah.
would have to be.
Yeah. I think about that a couple of ways. One, we have different cultures, so our answer isn't do what they're doing. But I do think within that is, I don't know that a single insurance carrier will ever play in this climate. A couple things that are interesting about ours, I would tell you, is, ignore the amount of money I get. Medicare fee-for-service is typically the best payer in terms of how fast I get paid. It just isn't enough, right? And so they don't have a profit motive. They don't have other things. Their rules there's a fairly electronic. They don't really want to talk to you. It's quick. The other thing that's interesting is Medicare Advantage costs more than Medicare fee-for-service. The government is paying more. When an enrollee goes to Medicare Advantage, they're throwing bonuses and all kinds of stuff out there to move people away from fee-for-service. So that was an eye-opener for me, that they're not saving money when they do that. So why are they doing this? Obviously, one out of the business. Maybe it's part of our political structure around we just want to involve everybody. Maybe when they get enough over there, they're going to turn the meter off and all of a sudden they're going to get less money and be caught holding the bag. I don't know. But there's a lot of stuff there that I think if we had. But what's very clear to me is when you have multiple health plans with their own sets of rules, it adds burden. And it's expensive and it's waste. And so on the other side, we've got this politics and the culture that don't want to talk about something different. But I think we'll have to get there. I've even talked to some interesting people who admit this is come hell or high water, we're not going to do a universal payer. We're now saying, no, this is the only way. There's just too much of a mess in what we have. How we get there, I don't know yet. But I think we have to start with what are the benefits that every American are entitled to. Let's start there. What is it everybody deserves, and how are we going to get it? And what is it we owe as individuals in this country who get that right? What do we owe in terms of our own participation in this? I don't know. The answer to that is, it'll probably be different, but the fact that we haven't sat down and put standards around this is, I don't know what the right word is. Is it nefarious? Is it insidious? It's something. I mean, it's clearly they don't want to, because it's something that we really need to do. Banks have done it. It's interesting. Someone was telling me how you can go anywhere in the world, put your card in a machine and get money. That's because every bank has agreed that we're going to do this. And why we can't do something like that is very frustrating. Yeah? Oh, they've got one there, Mike, yeah.
This keys off a little bit of what David asked, but in theory, if we were able to lower our costs by 30% GDP, all the health programs, systems, have a profit base and how they achieve it. We have the insurance companies that have their profit base. And one of the reasons why lack of standardizations, I personally believe, is because that takes away some of their control. But my question is have any of the theorists come up with a way to get us from here to there in, let's say, 40, 50 years? Because, I mean, we're talking about culture changes, we're talking about profit model changes, and we're talking about dropping 30, 40% of the dollar out of the pool.
Yep. Yeah, you know what you're reminding me of, okay, so last week at the RevCycle conference again, I don't know if you know about CAQH. I couldn't tell you what those initials are. Now it's just CAQH. And they have a program called CORE, and this is this committee on creating standards for data. And it's all related to the revenue cycle. And anybody can join. In fact, I saw Virginia Mason is on the list, so I think they're participating. I don't know who else is here. But they've set up, there are federal regulations around these interchanges between payer and health plan. 270, 271s around eligibility, and there's like 8 sets of these things. And they've built, well, how do I as a provider implement that? How do I as a payer implement the regulation as it sits? This is not changing any of the rules. This is just, how can we do this electronically? They've got these standards, and a bunch of payers are in it, so it's not that they aren't there. But what they've said is there's a certain amount of adoption, but it's not fully adopted. And if everybody adopted these rules and effectively did an interchange in accordance with these rules, we'd save $22 billion on these administrative processes. I put a LinkedIn message on this over the weekend, because it's staggering to me, because then you think $23 billion. And so I think, 5 more of those ideas, and we've reduced our entire spend 10%. And I think they're there. I think any smart group of revenue cycle could sit down and talk about something that scales out to 10 or 20 billion. There's just that much waste in the system. But you don't have to, this is just something you have to work with people on, and the core team have people there that they'll help you engage around this if it's something of interest. But there is real savings, and it's just regulatory. What the interesting, Margaret Schuler, who's on our board, was speaking there, and she's a RevCycle leader, and she says, it's a law that when you ask for something, they got to give it to you in a day. And I can't remember which piece of information this was, but if you ask, they owe it to you in a day. And right now, she has payers that are giving it to her 3 or 4 or 5 days later, and we just let them. They're in trouble if they don't give it to you in a day. And so it takes this kind of energy from us to get people to even do the things we've already agreed as a country that are acceptable and appropriate. So there are things we can do to move the needle, Mike, now, and I don't think it's enough long term, but it's a great place to start. Joe?
Or a comment. You were talking about wanting to set up a primary care doctor electronically, like your first time visit with a new primary care. My doctor recently retired, and so I was in the same situation. Very frustrated that it was a new visit. I couldn't do it. But guess where I could do it? With ZocDoc. With ZocDoc, you can sign up, you can get it, you can get a first-time visit. It's wonderful, and it's very user-friendly. And they're reminding me, oh, have you done this? It was just so yeah, it's out there and it can be done.
Yeah.
But I don't know why, and even some of the hospitals that I or systems that I participate with that I think are on the higher end of being digitally friendly are still putting that block there.
They're not thinking it through. They're not testing it. It's like out of sight, out of mind. There's something there. ChenMed is another one I hear a lot about. I don't know exactly what they do, but there are boutiques there where the people with money are going to move to. And anyway, other questions? Yeah.
So when you talk about some of these other systems that are more efficient, right, outside of our country, have people looked inside the country at, is Kaiser different in their cost of care, their cost per outcome? Is there a way to measure cost per outcome that makes sense?
Yeah, I don't have a good answer on that. The interesting thing, I was in the UK, like I said, in London, and I walked down the street, and I think it was United Healthcare building a clinic right there, right? Or Optum, I think it was one of them, but it could have been, maybe it was HCA. Some U.S. healthcare, coming to London. About 10% of the UK population kind of opt into a commercial product. 90% are in their system, and it is not perfect. I mean, there are good things about it because of the focus on the front end, but like I said, specialists, there's a waiting list of 7 or 8 million people once they've gotten a diagnosis to get to the next level that they need. And so that's a problem. So I think the answer isn't anybody copy what the other guy, but you can learn from the other guy. They could learn from some of the things we do. We can learn from them. But yeah, I don't know.
Just to comment on this waiting list, like I've noticed a huge change just over the last year. There's just to get a normal checkup, or if you have a sore throat or anything else, I feel like doctors' offices are telling you to go to urgent care because they don't have time to see you. Yeah. And I asked this question, do you not see people with a sore throat? Like, oh yeah, we would. We just don't have any slots. So
Yeah.
good luck.
Yeah. It's staggering. I don't know who was showing me this, but Amazon now has for this, if you're suffering from this, connect with us, we'll give you an answer in X hours. I mean, but I'm sure they've got prescription capability and all this other stuff, and it's going to be ridiculously cheap compared to what we do. And that should scare the crap out of a lot of us. About 15 years ago, I was looking at the Walmart model for a clinic. We were going to try to partner with them. This is just before they decided not to partner with anybody anymore. But guess who really didn't want that? It was the pediatricians. Because it's bread and butter. Give a shot, collect money, right? And all that stuff would go to Walmart, and they were really not having it. And you can put your head in the sand around that if you want. It's still coming. Just because I didn't do it didn't stop Walmart from their strategy, and it didn't stop others. It's still coming. If we don't pay attention to the fundamental motivator for people, we're going to get lost in this. Let me answer. There was 2 more questions that came yesterday that I just didn't want to ignore. If we can just do that real quick, and then I'll get off. We got a minute left. If my stupid thing will open up on me. Face ID, there it went. I think there was some, do we foresee possible consolidations of chapters and other major structural changes? Are there major changes coming for the chapters? And I thought, well, maybe I'd comment on that for just a minute. I don't know. Hopefully it's of broad enough interest. But I don't see any other. I mean, it's been a big year. I mean, you think about One HFMA, you think about the CVent thing and getting everybody's website thing pulled together, and it's been a lot. The rebate thing, I don't want to open that can of worms. But so there have been a lot of things. And I don't know, there's certainly nothing on our plate that says go do this to them. So what we are seeing across the nation are structural changes that are coming from within. There are chapters coming together saying, we don't have the manpower and administrative structure to support what we are as a chapter today. We would be better off in a broader region. Maybe you've already did that with Washington and Alaska at some point in your past, I don't know. But we see that in Ohio and Michigan. New York just did a big one. Everybody but Metro is now one big chapter in New York. And so I do think there will be more structural shifts like that, but they're organic from chapters. When we don't have a volunteer structure. Hey, frankly, our markets are really more interactive than being separate anyway. I mean, I don't know what all the value propositions were underneath for them, but those kinds of things are happening. I think maybe it's 10 years away, but it wouldn't surprise me after some of that stuff is shaken out, where we start saying, do we really need a region of one chapter here and a region of one chapter over here? Will regions come together? They might. There is no agenda at the HFMA, and we know that's kind of a short lifespan for us if we try. I mean, that is not the game. And so as chapters and regions think about things differently, given the way the world works today, we'll support that. We're not encouraging it, and we're not doing anything to accelerate any of that either. So I wanted to just hit that point, but I think I'm done. I appreciate your attention, and I'll see you at the cornhole tournament wearing green.
All right. Thank you.